Fáilte go féile na Bealtaine. Welcome to the Bealtaine Festival, where we're celebrating our living earth. We're celebrating biodiversity and natural heritage. We're based in the southeast of Ireland and we're focusing on the wonders of the southeast, but we're welcoming participants from all over Ireland and indeed all over the world. So you're very welcome. This is the last day of the festival, and I'm joined now by Sheila Donegan, who has been involved in the organisation of the festival. Sheila, can you tell me how has the festival been so far? It's quite different to normal.
You know, I can't believe we're actually at the final day of the festival. When we started planning for the festival in January, we hadn't envisaged the COVID-19 happening. We've been running the festival for 16 years, so with the lockdown, we were really keen that the festival would continue. And when we approached our partners with the idea of moving the festival online, they were really keen that it would go ahead. And you know, it's really with the support of our partners that we brought the festival to fruition, and it's gone, you know, remarkably well. You know, when we started moving the festival online, it was with an awful lot of nerves, apprehension, and trepidation because we'd never done anything like this before. But the response has just been so overwhelmingly positive. You know, it's been fantastic. I'd just really like to thank our partners, the people who gave virtual and live tours, those who gave activities and guides, and those who gave up their time to come on our daily panel. Thank you so much to everybody. You know, all the festival was possible due to financial support from Science Foundation Ireland, from Waterford Institute of Technology, and to Waterford Council. So thank you to everybody.
Well, yes, the festival has been a partnership, and we have had wonderful input from our partners who, at the time of the lockdown, were able to get out and take their phones or cameras and record some material for us. So it's really wonderful that we were able to turn this around so fast. We started last Saturday, the three Virgin broadcasters, and now a week later, we're season pros. I'll be joined later on by Ray Sinnott, Estates Manager of Mount Congreve Gardens, and Dr. Cordula Weiss from Calmast, but who is also a guide at Mount Congreve. But before that, we have another guest, and because it's the last day, I've brought some flowers into the studio. And this is because today's theme is all about plants, and we have had a lot of focus during the festival on plants, and we've had a lot of response, and particularly over last week's visit to Mount Congreve, we had a lot of interest. So we're going to visit Mount Congreve again in the company of Ray Sinnott. First, though, we have a special guest. I will be joined by Professor Liam Dolan, who is one of the world's leading botanists, and he is a professor. He's the Sherardian Professor of Botany in Oxford. He's the Fellow of Magdalen College in Oxford, and he is a Fellow of the Royal Society. Liam's work has identified or explained the mechanism of roots in plants, how they evolved to how plants evolved, and it's very much basic research guided by pure interest in science. But it has led to promise of increased yields for food crops around the world. So it's a great example of how basic research can have really important applications. So I caught up with Liam earlier on and I asked him about the importance of plants. Liam, fáilte go féile na Bealtaine ag céiliúradh ar domhan beo. Beo ar an idirlíne gach lá ag a cúig.
Tá sé Harbheith deas a bheith leat óin agus is é seo an tam is ansa dús sa bhliain an Bealtaine an tam sa bhliain a bhí achan rud ag ború is ar fás. Ní na héanacha ag teacht arás an Afric. Fannig mé na fáinleogaí ar na muileh tá siad arás. Agus an éagsúlacht ela ó híomh na héanacha. So anjasta latón.
Yes, it is a wonderful time of the year, and of course our ancient ancestors had a big celebration of Bealtaine at this time because of course they were acutely aware that they depended on the living earth, and we have tended to forget that over the years, and so that's why we try and celebrate the living earth every May. This is our 16th year doing it, and we've had to move online to reach people. But it also helps us to reach you, Liam, over in Oxford, and you can join us, which is one of the advantages of being online. Now, Liam, your own work, you're a plant biologist. You're interested in the evolution of plants. So maybe we could go back a bit. We had yesterday on the show we had Mary Power, who known as the sea gardener here, and we had a talk about seaweeds. And I gather that plant life started in water and eventually moved onto land. And your work, you were probably the first scientist to understand the mechanism in which uh, plants manage to develop roots. And that was pretty much a game changer for the planet, wasn't it?
Oh, it completely transformed the planet. Around 500 million years ago, or half a billion years ago, plants, very simple plants, similar to mosses and liverworts, began to grow on the edges of watercourses across the continental surfaces. And in the succeeding 100 million years, they spread from these damp areas to the driest areas of the continent. And within 100 million years, you had the first tall trees in dense forests. So there was that pivotal period in Earth history when plants landed and then radiated on the planet. And our work was to understand how roots evolved, because if you imagine seaweeds or other algae, they either float in the water or they attach to the rocky substrate or the muddy substrate in which they grow. And that attachment holds them in place, but they absorb nutrients over their entire surface. They absorb nutrients that are dissolved in the water, so that they never have a problem either getting water or getting the nutrients. Now, once plants started to grow on the land, they also began to grow in the air, because they would have grown on the surface of the continents and then grown up into the air. Now, growing into the air posed problems for these plants, or challenges for these plants. One of them was, because they were exposed to the air, they were constantly drying out, and they needed, one, to get water, and they needed to transport it up into the aerial part of the plant. And then they needed to waterproof themselves. So they needed to put a waterproof outer layer on them, a waxy layer. And in addition to water, they also needed nutrients like phosphorus and nitrate. Every farmer will be aware of how important these are for plant productivity. So roots evolved, and roots effectively provide plants with a source of water. So they drill for water. They mine for nutrients. And very importantly, they offer an interface between the plant and the soil bacteria and soil fungi, because it's very important to remember that just like us, humans were Homo sapiens, one species, but we've got millions of different species of bacteria in our guts that we absolutely depend on. And this interaction between organisms is a symbiosis. It's a coming together of organisms. Plants do exactly the same. And one of the most obvious places they do it is in the soil. And these interactions between the plants and the microbes, the ability of the roots to get water, and the ability of the plants, the roots, to provide nutrients for the plant, allowed these first colonizers to adapt to life on the land And I'd like to emphasize that this is an event that happened once. Plants colonized the plants once in Earth history. Earth is over 4.5 billion years ago old. And this event happened once, and it happened 500 million years ago. So if you were to, when I make my top 10 list of events in Earth history, you know, the colonization of the continental surface by plants is right up there in the top 3 or 4. Because if it wasn't for that event, you wouldn't have the vast vegetation that we see across the continental surfaces. If you didn't have that vegetation, you'd have no food for animals. So the place would be very different. It would be almost a desert-like environment. Could be a wet desert, but it certainly wouldn't have the diversity of plants, and it wouldn't have the large animals that followed plants out of the water 400 million years ago. Because when plants moved out and they started to radiate and colonize and form a diversity of forms, very soon after, you see the animals leave the water, because there was a source of food for the animals on the continents that there hadn't been before. So you had waves of colonization. You had a plant wave, a green wave, then you had an animal wave. And then what's really wonderful about history, about Earth history and evolution, is that you sometimes find animals that went back. So whales are a great example of that, where you know their relatives were terrestrial mammals, but they decided to go back to the water. And you see exactly the same in sea grasses, zostra. So there are fields of zostra down in Cork, and these are sea grasses that grow in quiet areas of seawater. And these are grasses whose ancestors evolved on land, and then they migrate back into the ocean. So there's been a back and forth numerous times over the last 500 million years.
Well, Liam, you use a term that has come up again and again during the festival with different experts, and that's the word interconnectedness. And I think that's at the root, if you pardon the pun, of what biodiversity is all about, isn't it? It's the connections.
It's so right. So in some ways, what Victorian scientists and botanists and zoologists did is they collected lists. And we're still collecting lists because we still don't know how many species exist on the planet. We think we probably know about half of the flowering plants, for example, but we really don't know. But once we have those lists, then we can begin to see how ecosystems work, because ecosystems work through the interaction of at various levels. So they can be the interaction between organisms in the way we just described, where humans interact with the microbes in their guts, roots interact with the fungi and bacteria to access nutrients. And at an ecosystem level, there's an interaction between the organisms in those ecosystems. And these interactions are absolutely pivotal to the stability of those systems, because if you pull out or remove species from that ecosystem, then that ecosystem can collapse. And I think an extreme example of this would be deforestation in the tropics. So when the first humans, well, not the first human, when the first human farmers came to Ireland, what we see in the pollen record is the removal of trees. And so that changed an island that was, to a large extent, though not exclusively, a forested island, to an island of pastures and fields. And in some ways, that's what we see today. In parts of the tropics where large, valuable trees are being removed, these very extensive but delicate tropical forests become destabilized, and you often see these environments disappear, these ecosystems disappear, and this instability causes a destruction. So the removal of parts of that interacting system destabilize the environment. But there's one thing I'd like to emphasize about these interactions that I think is so important. And you're right to emphasize that interaction is important. But it's also important to remember it happens at all sorts of levels. So for me, I've been very influenced in my thinking about evolution by the work of James Lovelock, who, back, over 30 years ago, came up with this idea of the Earth system as an interacting set of subsystems. And this is now pretty much mainstream Earth science, Earth system science. And so whilst the organisms that I work on interact with bacteria and fungi to extract nutrients from the soil, plant communities on the planet in general act as an element in the Earth system. And they're the element in the Earth system that takes energy from the sun and transforms that into chemical energy. And then that chemical energy then powers virtually all life on Earth. So if you could imagine there's an electric cable or an energy cable running from the Earth or from the sun to the Earth, plants are at the receiving end, transforming that into useful energy. Now, anything that destabilizes vegetations or the ability of plants to transform that energy into chemistry, which fuels animal life, then poses a threat to the Earth system. And one of the largest threats is that as plants transform that radiant energy from the sun into chemical energy, they take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And the carbon in the sugars, in the chemical energy that these plants make, ultimately comes from the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And so plants have been pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere for over 2 billion years. First of all, it was as photosynthetic bacteria, and then subsequently, after 500 million years ago, as land plants. And that reaction that converts the sun's radiant energy into chemical energy also pulls carbon out of the atmosphere. And what plants have been doing is pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere since the first time they evolved. And if we look at our neighboring planets like Venus, where life never evolved, carbon dioxide levels are very high in the atmosphere there. Okay. Yeah. And so what plants have done is they've removed carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. They've made the planet habitable. And now with our impact on natural vegetation and on the oceans where photosynthetic algae and bacteria are pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, as we decrease that, we're contributing to the elevation in CO2 in the atmosphere. And we all know what elevated CO2 levels do. The higher the levels of CO2, the more infrared energy gets trapped in the Earth system. And then as more of that infrared energy is trapped in the Earth system, the warmer the Earth system comes. And then that has all sorts of knock-on effects, from forest fires in Australia to hurricanes frequency increasing in the Caribbean, and then all the human suffering that goes along with that.
Well, I think the planet is getting a little bit of a break during the COVID restrictions. And I think certainly here in Ireland, we've had very fine weather since the start, and people are out walking, possibly the same routes each day. And over that period, they've been able to, I suppose, see maybe for the first time, or rediscover nature, and to see the spring turn into summer. And I think we're getting, our feedback is that a lot of our viewers are really getting more switched on and more aware of nature. But how, in terms of just Liam, your own background, um, you you're working as a plant scientist, but you love plants themselves, don't you? It's not just looking through a microscope at the cells, but plants themselves. You do you do like plants, don't you?
Yeah, I have to admit I do like plants, and I think I was a botanist long before I was ever a scientist. And my interest in plants and natural history started as a 13-year-old going to school, discovering that many birds and plant species grew along the side of the Dodder that I had walked by. I'd spent the previous, 13 years of my life just walking by thinking there were these green things and there were these little brown feather things flying around. But I'd been very interested in I'd been very impressed by natural history documentaries. Now, back then, there weren't that many of them. But for me, this was a view into a world that filled me with wonder. And wonder, it still fills me with wonder. But I always thought that this was a world that was somewhere else. I thought that this wonderful nature and natural history happened in Africa. It happened in South America. It didn't happen on the banks of the Dodder. It didn't happen in Dollymount, and it didn't happen in the Phoenix Park. And then once friends in school pointed out the first kingfisher and the first tufted duck that I had ever seen along the river, and also highlighted to me that the flowers that were in bloom in May along the Dodder were actually brought to Ireland by Romans. Came to Britain by the Romans, and then the Romans brought them, and then the British brought them here, and then they expanded as a weed. I began to realize that actually I was living in one of these natural oases in this magical land. So I was really fortunate to have good friends who pointed this out to me. And then my interest in plants and in birds in particular, developed then as almost as a hobby. And as a youngster, I spent a lot of summers and winters in the Bull Island, where we've got some of the largest populations of various geese species. For example, the Brent geese in Western Europe. We've got huge populations of knot. And also, the Bull Island was very exciting to me because it was the first time I realized and I observed what a process that we call succession. So that's where land begins to colonize wet areas, and then the older the land is, the more complex the plant species that grow there. So you'll have the land right next to the water, just as the land is beginning to creep out into the water, and you get very simple, very few plants there. But then if you look at land that had been reclaimed, say 100 years ago, there's a huge increase in the amount of diversity there. So I began to realize that nature wasn't a static process, but was actually a very dynamic process, and that it unfolded, over time. So, for example, I became very aware of the seasons, but then over the hundreds of years, but then ultimately over the thousands and millions of years time scale.
So nature is not static, and you also discovered it's not other. It's in front of you. And I think our theme this year of biodiversity on your doorstep resonates well with that. And I think any people watching, if they've young people who are interested in nature, um, go to our website, look for the guides, and people of all ages, if they're interested in biodiversity, you can be involved in science yourself. There's a lot of citizen science projects, and there's one area of science where the layperson can become involved. And if you go to the Biodiversity Data Centre website, you'll see details on how to get involved. Liam, it has been really fascinating talking to you, and thank you very much for making the time to join us here on Living Earth.
It's been great to be with you, Guru Mila.
Well, that was really fascinating and thought-provoking. And now we go from talking about plants to looking at plants. Uh, Ray Sinnott, the estates manager in Mount Congreve Gardens, is about to bring us on a tour of the gardens. There's very little commentary on this video, and that's on purpose so that there's an absolute profusion of color, so that sit back, relax, and enjoy the colors. And on the far side, we'll talk about what was in the video.
Hello and welcome to Mount Congreve Gardens. What follows is a short video where we showcase some of the wonderful colours on display out in Mount Congreve at the moment. We hope that when we reopen quite soon that we can welcome all our friends, old and new, back to enjoy the gardens with us. This part of the video was shot in the upper woodland gardens off the main path. The azaleas, deciduous azaleas and the magnolias are all shown off to their full effect with the wonderful underlay of bluebells throughout, and of course the very helpful bird song which accompanies it. At this time of the year in particular, it can be almost overwhelming with the colours that are around, and it's difficult to know which path to take. Each one promises more than the last, I always find. I hope you've enjoyed this short walk around Mount Congreve. For anyone who thinks that they've missed the best of it with the spring having now passed, you needn't worry, there is plenty more to see for the rest of the year here. Thank you.
Right, and I'm joined by Ray Sinnott, who is the estate manager at Mount Congreve Gardens, and what a privilege to be working in the gardens at this time of the year. And also Dr. Cordula Weiss, who you've met before from the Calmast team who organised the festival, and she has also been involved in guiding tours around the gardens. So Ray, to you, tell us a little bit about why these gardens are reckoned to be among the world's finest gardens.
I think it's fair to say we think they are the finest, but they are amongst the finest, and that's mainly down to Mr. Congreve's obsession and passion to collect as many plants as possible. And information was shared with me lately by Matthew Jebb from the National Botanical Gardens, Dr. Matthew Jebb, and that 50% of the plant species in Ireland are held in Mount Congreve, which will give you an indication of the sheer scale of it. Now, I know we've been having technical difficulties, I've mentioned already. I'm blaming this guy here, Mr. Congreve, who's sitting behind me. It's the anniversary of his death today. So it was hardly a tragedy at that stage. He had lived to be 104, and he attributed having the gardens to his longevity. That's what it was, to look after the gardens. But the collection itself, you've just seen a very small clip of it up in the Woodland Gardens. It runs to almost 80 acres. And in amongst those azaleas that we saw, there are several different branches of them that go down, several different paths and areas. There's always something to see. It is a privilege for me to work here, and also lucky enough to live here. And that it has something to offer all times of the year. It's in its particular beauty at the moment with the spring and the summer, but it's got something all year round. It really has. So for that reason, it's quite a unique garden, and I think it's for that reason it's deemed to be one of the best gardens in the world.
Okay, well, we'll look at some of the what's in bloom at the moment from the video, and we can take a rest from looking at me and far more beautiful view here of now this one. I know these are bluebells, and there are a lot of bluebells there at the moment. Are the bluebells planted, or did they naturally arise?
They're also the native bluebell. We have in some areas the Spanish bluebell, which is taken over, which is a little higher. But these are the native bluebells, which I presume this is what the country would have looked like thousands of years ago. They're not planted by us, and they spread themselves. Now they're not attached by anyone else within here. I mean, so we don't spray them off. We don't do anything to them. Just leave them take on a life of their own. We have 2 bluebell walks in here, and we could probably do something similar that they've done out in Corrimore, a bluebell festival, because we have many fans of them.
Yeah,
I've got
yeah,
a sister who lives in the UK who comes here specifically for them.
yeah. And there's many places, even just around Waterford, with fabulous displays of bluebells. The woods in Dunmore East are one that I can think of.
Yes.
Now we look at another one. This is a lovely white flowering bush. Can you tell me what this is, Ray?
It's either Azalea palestrina or Azalea polar bear. For the white, of course.
Okay.
It was Karen. It was our social media lady that did the video. So.
Okay. Well, look, we'll see. This one here now is a more pinkish flower. Another azalea, I presume.
Another azalea. We're very heavy on the azaleas at the moment, I would say.
Yeah, and tell me, Cordula, the azaleas are flowering bushes, or maybe they look like small trees, very similar to rhododendrons. Are they? How do we tell the difference?
They are actually quite similar, and the rhododendrons are a genus of the azaleas. So they all kind of belong together to the same family of plants. But when you look a bit closer and you need to look, at the flower itself, you can see that the azaleas, they usually, not all of them, but most of them only have 5 stamens, whereas the rhododendron, they would have 10. Again, I say usually because there's always exceptions. Another thing that usually is the case is that azaleas are deciduous and rhododendrons are evergreen, so they keep the green leaves throughout the year.
Okay.
So I think what most people would also know is that rhododendrons are usually the larger ones, the bigger ones, but again, I'm generalizing a bit there, so it's not always the case, but this is
okay. Well,
generally how we can distinguish them.
The azaleas certainly are adding huge color at the moment. This is a rather elegant tree. What's that? Kind of yellowish leaves?
Well, that's the Acer Orange Dream, Acer palmatum Orange Dream, that people would be familiar with. There's a grouping of them at the top of the main avenue. It's a beautiful tree, a particularly beautiful tree with a very delicate leaf on it, and it comes into its own really in the autumn. But at the moment, you can see it in particular against a beautiful blue sunny sky. It's very, very vivid. It's golden, glowing.
Beautiful, yeah. And what part of the world are these native to?
They're mainly Asiatic. A lot of them are from China and Japan. That's where there are similar ones here. They're similar to our own sycamore, of course. It's the same family, but that's where these ones are mainly in from.
Okay, and the next one is a kind of a reddish, I suppose a rosy red flower.
I think that's our Fikes rosy red, or else that goes in along on the main path from the photograph. There's a whole variety of them. Part of what Mr. Congreve done that I mentioned earlier was that he would plant up 300 or 400 plants at any one time, rather than have just one on show. It gives a whole swathe of colour down along different parts of the garden.
And here is a beautiful yellow flower.
That's one of the deciduous azaleas. They are in full bloom at the moment. They're almost fluorescent. That one is golden eagle, and they're a particularly striking plant. They really are. You've got to see those to believe them. They are almost fluorescent, I would describe them as.
It certainly is. I mean, they're a blaze of colour. And now we're looking at a tree with creepers on it. Very much it's kind of a jungle scene there. What are we looking at?
That's our jungle.
Okay.
That's Clematis Montana rubens, which people are very familiar with. That's, if you ever see a delicate pink flower on a camellia, or on a clematis, sorry, it's generally Montana rubens, and that's that one. It grows up into the tree at quite a height actually down here. We also have our actinidias in the same area, but people are familiar with it's a very small version of what we now know as the kiwi fruit, and we had an abundance of them last year. So we have there's a lot of creepers up around the top woods throughout the oaks.
Okay.
And we eat those kiwi fruits actually.
Yeah,
Are they edible? Oh,
they
nice.
are.
Great.
But the
Okay.
crows usually take care of them, unless you want to get a rope and climb up that. We'll just make do with the low-hanging fruit as ever.
Very
Okay,
good.
well, look, we'll just look at the last one, and this is just a blaze of pink along the pathway, and this is just such a profusion of blossom.
That's I think around the dell, the area again in the top woods, and it's azalea rose pink, and that's what it's known as. I know a lot of these plants because I used to take them as cuttings years ago and take them down to the nursery and have them propagated, and then I would get a phone call from Mr. Congreve, and he would give out to me for cutting his flowers, and then a week later he'd ring me and complain, why didn't I have enough cuttings? He just liked to keep us on edge like that, keep us busy.
Yeah. Well, Cordula, why is there something special about the area? I mean, we're talking about kiwis and all of these Asian plants and plants from around the world. Is it particularly hospitable or suited?
It is actually. It's a certain kind of microclimate or micro ecosystem down there. And when I say down there, I literally mean it's a bit lower than the area around. And in addition to that, the late Ambrose Congreve, when he started developing those gardens into what they are now, he started cutting down all these so-called rubber trees, which are trees like beech or ash or whatever that would take up too much space and rob, that's where the name's coming from, and rob the nutrition from the other plants. But what he did, keep an eye on what he cultivated were oaks and other trees that have deep roots and also provide shelter and protection from the harsh winds. And that kind of really adds to the climate in there because they have these huge trees all around. They keep the harsh winds out, but at the same time the sea air is still coming in and loads of sun coming in. So whenever I go there, I have to take it's like a different place really. You can sit there in a t-shirt, whereas in Waterford you still would have put on your coat and all. So you literally feel that there's a different climate, and that this is in particular what makes it so special and why there's plants from all the different regions of the world. I think there's about 12,000 different species, isn't it, Ray?
It's closer to 15 actually.
Oh, close. Oh, right.
And Ray, you're a lot of people. There's a lot of visitors to the southeast. Travel along the Greenway, the Waterford Greenway from Waterford to Dungarvan, a beautiful trail, and just it follows along the River Suir, and people might get glimpses into Mount Congreve from there. But is the site along the riverbank particularly, is it helpful?
Yeah, it is, and it was actually, there's a 2 kilometre stretch of the Greenway was donated by Mount Congreve to finish the Greenway actually. So people, without realising it, are on Mount Congreve ground when they're walking right past us. But there's some areas, the Rock Waterfall, where people would be familiar with the tree ferns, and then at the back of the wall garden also, where we have a green space area planted up with camellias. So you would get a good view of it. There's good vantage points along the Greenway right beside us, and of course we have our own entrance from the Greenway into the gardens as well, where the train platform is. So yeah, you can see a lot of the gardens from the Greenway.
Yeah, and just finally, Cordula, you're from Germany, and you've done some guiding in Mount Congreve for overseas visitors. How do overseas visitors react to the gardens?
They are always extremely surprised because in Germany, when you hear about Ireland, to be honest, it's usually that it's always raining. You have to pack your rain gear when you come into Ireland. It's very green, so it's the Emerald Island. So it is always very green, but people do not expect something like Mount Congreve, where the green actually turns into pink and blue from the bluebells and the pink from the peonies. They should be out now at this time of the year. They should be coming out.
They're just coming actually. Sorry, Cordula. Okay. We've about a week or two away actually. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, they're called Pfingstrosen in German, which is the rose of Pentecost. So they usually flower this time of the year. And this is something that all the visitors notice first, because they come in the walled garden and they're just hit by this block of really, really strong pink color. And it just continues like that, because I think it was one of the ideas or one of the things that Ambrose Congreve did, that he planted loads of flowers, loads of shrubs in one place. So you have those different blocks of really strong colors.
It's an assault on the senses, but one thing that
In a good way.
doesn't come across in the video, of course, is the smells, the fragrances.
Well,
yes, we identified one of them as the fragrant walk. It has a fragrance. I was corrected years ago by Herman Duhl, who said it, that he mentioned something that smells, and it wasn't a flower, and he said a flower has a fragrance. So we have the fragrant walk now, where there is something beautiful to smell all year round. Especially, believe it or not, the strongest smells come out in the winter, when we have, and Cordula is very familiar with the gardens and gives, I could say, an excellent tour. The Daphne Jacqueline postel that's up behind the house, it envelops the entire garden in the winter, in particular around December, with just a beautiful, very strong smell. It really is gorgeous. And the mahonias, like, they're all along that. And the sounds of the birds as well that you can hear now. Not just now, we're all talking about it because the birds are getting a chance to be heard over the traffic and everything else. It's always like that out here, because we've been so lucky that we're in a secluded area. We have the river behind us, we have the road. So it's really is a unique place.
That's actually, the mahonies, they really surprised me as well. And I think that's also for visitors who don't know anything, because they have those kind of spiky leaves and they're not particularly pretty. They're nice, but not as colorful as the rest of the garden. And then you go through it and you smell, they have this amazing scent, or this aroma, this fragrance. And it's just fantastic. And they're named actually after an Irish man, Bernard McMahon, who went to the US in the late 1800s. And he was the first one to actually catalog plants and seeds. And in 1802, 1803, something around that, he published the first catalog of seeds and plants in the US. And this species is named after him. So there's an Irish connection there as well.
Okay, well, it's been very fascinating to visit Mount Congreve, even if it is just a virtual tour. We look forward to being able to visit in person or in body, and to get the fragrances and the color and the sound, and it must be a really great place to unwind and get the full benefits of wellness from nature, Ray.
Yes, it is. And we're looking forward to having the public back again. We've been closed, of course, like many other places. So we're looking forward to reopening on, I think it's the 9th we have marked down for reopening. But it's a great place for people to come and reconnect with nature and family and whatever else. Like, we're all of us that work here and all of us that come out here really appreciate it. Like, what a treasure it is to have in Waterford, in this part of the country. It's a wonderful place. It really is a wonderful place. It was an incredible gift to the country.
Yes, it was. And we remember Ambrose Congreve at this time of the year, his anniversary, and his legacy will live on for many generations through the gardens. So thank you very much, Ray and Cordula, for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Owen. Thanks for having us part of it.
So we close out our festival with that visit to Mount Congreve Gardens, and we've enjoyed having you with us and this year, and I hope you enjoyed the various visits and also the activities and guides that we have on our website, livingearth.ie. And they'll be up for a long time to come, and you can avail of them anytime. So when restrictions end and people get to move around further, you might be able to visit some of these places and use the guides. And the activities will be particularly useful for parents having to home school their children. And, for primary pupils, there's another month to go. And these are great activities to keep them occupied and have them learn without it feeling like school. So really good, deep learning activities. So It remains for me then to once again thank our sponsors and partners and things. But before that, you're all waiting to hear about the prizes, I'm sure. So the first prize is these are the grand prizes, our three grand prizes. Uh, our main prize for the week, we were giving away many OPW site passes, and now we have our three top prizes, and the first prize is for 10 visit voucher to Lafcadia Hearn Japanese Gardens, and we were there with them during the week. Beautiful place in Tramore, and that one goes to Alice Power Culleton. And here is, I think, a massive bug hotel that's been built. That would nearly need planning permission. So fantastic work there, and thanks for sharing them with us. Now, next we have the OPW. Uh, who are so generous to us, giving us so many passes, but they also have an annual pass to all OPW sites in Ireland, which is a fantastic prize. And the winner of that is, let us see now, Catherine and Francis McGrath. Oh yes, I remember these. They two kids up there in Cavan, and they had built a robot beehive, and they built robot pollinators to prepare for all eventualities. Well done, girls, and you can visit all OPW sites for a year with that pass, so that's fantastic. Uh, our next one is then, we were just there ourselves, Mount Congreve House and Gardens, and you see how beautiful it is. And there's the temple there, which has beautiful views commanding the sweep of the Shore River. And the winner of that is Maria Fuhr, who also has been sending us lots of photographs during the course of the festival. So well done to all of you, and enjoy your prizes. Now, of course, if you didn't win the prize to Mount Congreve House and Gardens, you can still visit yourself, and hopefully when the restrictions ease, lots more of you can get there. But I'm sure there's some place uh, local to you that you can visit. Now, we traditionally finished the festival with a mandala, no, a beach mosaic to be more precise on the on Anstown Beach. That's traditionally for years we've been doing that, and unfortunately we can't get together, but we'll do it by picture. This is last year on Anstown Beach, and it's okay to make something like that using the beach materials because below the high tide mark, and when that tide comes in, it erases all, but you have a fantastic experience doing it. Um, Now, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who helped and all our sponsors. But firstly, thanks to the crew who helped me this week. There was the research had to be done, technical support, and all very difficult at such a distance. And we also in Calmast run Maths Week Ireland, and that happens in October. But when the schools closed, we decided to present materials every day for people learning at home, and we've been doing that right since the 13th of March, and every day it's an onerous task, but we've kept it going. And this week, when we're busy with Bealtaine, Diane Murphy has been keeping that show going. Great work there, Diane. And the technical support and all the imagery and all the graphics were produced by Ben Dolan. And then we have Cordula Weiss and Sheila Donegan, who did the main organization of the festival. Another event we run is the Robert Boyle Summer School every June in Lismore and Waterford, and unfortunately we've had to postpone it this year. We were looking at dates later in the summer, but they look less likely now, and we don't want to be taking risks with people's health. We will keep people posted on that, and we may use an online format if all else fails. So we may see you again for that during the summer. So thanks to our sponsors. These things are expensive. We have to rely on a lot of support from Waterford Institute of Technology, which is where we're based. And WIT has been great over the years in public engagement, particularly around science and what we're doing this week in terms of our environmental awareness and biodiversity. We are also supported by Waterford City and County Council, and our major sponsor for this and other events is Science Foundation Ireland. So thank you to all of them. And now a word again, Sheila, at the start of the program thanked our partners. We have too many to list themselves, but you met a lot of them during the week participating in our panel discussions and also hosting us on-site visits. Hopefully next year we'll be able to visit in person and these places. And if you are from another part of the country, uh, we would hope maybe you might come down and stay in Waterford for some or all of the festival. It's really wonderful getting out, a wonderful opportunity to have such expert guides, and all our events are free as well, not just when they're online. So it was great having you with us to be able to share not only the beauty and wonder of the Southeast, but also the important message about environmental stewardship. We are only passing through, and we want to hand on a sustainable and beautiful world to future generations. So we must look after biodiversity. We must get people interested in the wonders of nature, and particularly young people. And we must be active. We must take action ourselves in whatever small way we can. And that could include volunteering for beach cleanups or the like, getting involved with local organizations, getting involved in tidy towns. Lots and lots of organizations can do with volunteers, and also um, organizations that we featured and others rely on public support to keep going, and there are a lot of cases their income streams are drying up because of the shutdown. So get online and make donations, or buy merchandise or season tickets or vouchers from them to make a real difference to keep them going in this difficult time, so that they're there for us and for biodiversity when all of this restrictions end and things come back to normal. Hopefully we'll see you next year, and until then, goodbye, stay home and stay safe.